and thank you for joining us today. Today, I have Dr. Deandra Mall, who serves as the Vice President of Student Affairs at the University of Florida. Welcome, and thank you for doing this interview today.
Thank you for having me.
So, did you always know that you were interested in student affairs?
So I figured out I was interested in student affairs during my last years of college, undergrad, and that's how I made my way into the field. So not always, but always having been an active student leader in both high school and college led me to this path.
Awesome. So, what did you major in undergrad?
My undergraduate degrees are in political science and criminal justice.
Okay. So, what was that defining moment when you knew that, hey, I want to work in student affairs?
Well, I shadowed an attorney because I was actually going to law school, had completely completed that process and shadowed an attorney and figured out that that was not, in fact, what I wanted to do. So I went to meet with my mentor, who was the vice president for student affairs. I'm at Kent State University, where I attended undergrad. And I said to her, I know that this was my path, but I don't want to go to law school next year. And she said, okay. Well, so what do you want to do and who do you want to help? And I said, well, I really want to help and advocate for students. I love what I'm doing right now. I love the idea that I can be in a space and help to transform policy, because I was also student body president. So that was a part of the role as well, figuring out how you, of course, develop policies that positively impact the greater student body. And she said, well, have you thought about student affairs? I'm like, well, what is student affairs? She's like, it's what you do every day. She was the vice president for enrollment management and student affairs. And I was like, oh, that makes total sense. And so applied and found my way in that direction.
That's awesome. So, what do you enjoy most about what you do?
The student interaction and engagement. I think knowing that what we do is all about student success. It really is about comprehensive excellence in the student experience. It really is about helping students to find their way. For me, championing students as they go along and enabling student success is critical to how I see my own life and how I help my team to frame their roles as well, and how we help universities to see what it means to be in a space where everything you do really does impact students. And so we have to make sure that what we do impacts them positively. And so for me, just having the opportunity day in and day out is what really excites me and keeps me going in my job.
Okay. So, in your role, you have a lot of different departments that you oversee. There's a lot of politics that goes on, and being able to navigate those in a professional way. So tell me about some of those personal challenges that you had to go through to get to where you are today.
So I will say, in most aspects, one of the greatest challenges that I've had to overcome is probably being a person of color in my day-to-day life. There are so many things that we see nationally that impacts my ability to function and to simply be as a Black woman in various spaces. However, professionally, the biggest hurdle I've had to overcome is actually my age. I'm significantly younger than most colleagues who are vice president for student affairs throughout the country. And again, that's always been a piece that I've had to manage, because people have different expectations of what they believe I can or cannot do, even without having had the opportunity to engage. And so throughout my career, I've always had to make sure that I've been forward thinking. I've always had to fight with the strategy, and that I wasn't always good at that. I think that there are times where I definitely allowed my imposter syndrome to show up before I did with my efforts. And in that, I mean that I would overread, I would overthink, I would make sure that I was over prepared because I never wanted to be caught off guard. And so in that, recognizing throughout my career, learning to know when I had something to say or when I had to say something was a big difference. And so I will say the hurdle of my age, I had to remove it out of my own lane, because I had to realize and accept the fact that I was in those spaces because I was deemed appropriate to be there. There are folks who poured into me, that prepared me to become a vice president for student affairs, myself included, and I had to honor that space. So definitely the ageism that comes with being a young Black woman in these spaces was present. I will say now, as a sitting vice president, I don't believe that is my hurdle anymore, because I get to come in and I am the leader. And also my previous institution, I was there for 16 years. I received my PhD there. So sometimes it was hard to be a grown up where I grew up. right? And so people saw me as the kid in the environment, and it was hard when the student became the teacher. And so in this space, I don't believe that that's the hurdle anymore, but I know when people initially see me, some of them are shocked to see that I'm not what they would consider to be the traditional sitting vice president.
That's awesome. So you just unloaded so much knowledge right there in that answer. So what I heard you saying is now, or in the position that you're in now, you set the tone. So you don't have to worry about, am I doing this right? What other people are thinking, as you did in your previous position. And because you went there for what, your master's?
PhD. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so your PhD. So you were a student, and faculty, they probably had this notion, oh, this is my student. They still looked at you as not as the person who was in this leadership role, but more as, this is a student who I mentored, who I taught. And
Absolutely.
yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I see that a lot when professionals graduate from the institution and then work for that institution. They're still treated like a student. In order to really come into your own, I always recommend that you have to, go to another institution.
Yeah, I would agree that. And again, I was able to be promoted in that space. I moved up 7 different positions over the course of 16 years. So it definitely allowed me to grow. But I will also say, I also had a mentor who believed in me, and in spite sometimes even of my own missteps or what others may have thought about me due to my age,
Mm-hmm.
she saw my potential, my capacity, and my work ethic, and literally what I could bring to the environment, and she instilled that in me. I think that also speaks to the idea of having not just mentors, but sponsors. She was also my sponsor, right? She made sure that she could look ahead because she knew the road and tell me what it was like as she came back, and made sure she helped clear the path. That's important. You have to have sponsors and mentors. But I would also say, yes, sometimes you can bloom where you're planted. Other times you have to go where you can grow.
Mm-hmm.
Do whatever one is meant for you. Again, I had 16 really amazing years and opportunities of growth. But when it came time for this step, it was absolutely time for me to figure out where I was going to head next, because at some level, my role there, my time there had come to a space where I need to make sure that I could do this on my own footing and take what I learned there and move it and apply it into other settings. So absolutely, being the adult here is different. It's kind of like, with your parents. Your parents, no matter how old you get, they're always going to see you as their child in some ways. And so
Mm-hmm.
there are things that they will put out there because they know that they want to make sure you don't fall. This is a space, as you go beyond where you've grown up, that you have to stand on your own 2 feet. And so I'm eternally grateful for what I gained in my previous institution. I'm also incredibly thankful for what I gained here as well.
That's awesome. So one bit of advice that I say we could take away from what you just said is, you have to establish yourself with a mentor, someone who believes in you and what you can offer to the organization. I find that, very important as well. Uh, Having a mentor not only allows doors to be open, but helps you to function once those doors are open. And so, can you tell me about, you don't have to say names, but are you mentoring right now?
I am. I am. I firmly believe that you can't always pay back, but you can always pay forward. In the words of the late great Woody Hayes, and so I strongly believe this is for me to give to others what others gave to me, and so it is really important. I do have multiple mentors across the country, or mentees across the country, that I make sure I'm doing that, and even here locally. And I think that folks also, it's beneficial to see mentorship as sometimes, a reason, a season, or a lifetime. There are very different reasons I mentored. I mentored some students through their PhD process as they were trying to find their way. And so that was specifically for a reason. Others, there was a season, they were my graduate students, or they were young professionals. And so that was it too. I have some folks that I've mentored since the minute they walked on the campus, and I continue to do so. There are colleagues that I mentor, and vice versa. There are colleagues who mentor me. And so mentorship doesn't necessarily have to be age progressive, meaning there are mentors who will be younger than you because they've taken a different path than you as well. And so recognizing that mentors come in all shapes and fashions. I have mentors who, my primary mentor is an African-American woman, and I'm beyond grateful for me to have a mirror. I think mentorship is also about mirroring. And so Dr. Javon Adams-Gaston, who is now the president of Norfolk State University, she's the consummate mentor and the one who's really made sure that she, as she climbed, that she also lifted. And so for me, I try to very much live my values and do the same.
So what would you tell a person who is looking for a mentor? How would they approach a person?
It's like a relationship. Make sure that both of you know what you're expecting from that relationship. In this case, the mentorship, making sure that the boundaries are clearly set. I think sometimes people think that mentorship means that you talk to someone daily or weekly. That's not always the case. There are some mentors that I check in with once a month. Whenever I go back home to my home state, one of my staff, I make sure that former team members, I make sure that I connect with him. And so we'll go to lunch and we'll talk about his journey or his experiences. So making sure you understand what you're looking for in a mentor, but also what that person is able to give. Sometimes people are mismatched and they're disappointed when their mentor doesn't turn out to be what they anticipated. It's a relationship. So making sure that what you're wanting from that relationship, that person can actually give you, and that you're also willing to put into it as well, because a mentorship is a two-way street. It doesn't mean that I go and I'm always the one pouring. I also have to be the one drinking. And so making sure the mentorship is also a dual relationship, that you're both getting from it what you both need.
That's awesome. You said some great things, especially when you look at mentorship. It's not always about taking, but also giving. And sometimes people may not understand that and may take, and not even realizing that there's a point where you have to give. So, for those of you who are watching this, make sure that you not only take, but that you give as well. Um, I'm not going to get spiritual or anything, so I won't even go there. But what are some of the qualifications or characteristics someone must possess to work in student affairs?
I will just say a willingness to do things. I think sometimes people come in almost with what I like to call the fur coat mentality. They sling it over their shoulders and they think that everything's going to be given. No, some things are also given from you on behalf of the organization. I think that coming into this, I've always said from the time I was a kid that I was willing to work, right? I'm a worker. And so if nothing else, I know that I can do the work that's necessary to get me to what's coming next. I would also say that coming into this space is really important that you have a spirit of humility. And that doesn't mean that you are humiliated. It means that you're willing to be humble in these spaces too, because there's much to learn as we go forward. I strongly believe that there's no job that is beneath me or above me. And so making sure that I will always work toward both ends of understanding what everyone else is doing as well, because sometimes folks get in this range of they're title heavy. Nothing you should do in student affairs should be so focused on your title that you lose sight of the work. I know sometimes people are waiting for that director title. They're waiting for that vice president title, and that's how they frame their existence. In student affairs, it's about doing the work that gets you to where you want to go and pivoting as needed to address the needs of the student on any given day. You have to also be thoughtful when you come into this space. If you're not thoughtful about all the ways in which all of our actions impact the next person, that's going to be absolutely to your disadvantage. So being very thoughtful, being willing to learn as much as you're willing to teach. I will say there's not a day that goes by that I really am not learning something new, even as a vice president. I learn from my staff, I learn from the students, I learn from my colleagues, I learn from parents, I learn from our environments. Everything is a learning and a teachable moment in some way or other. And so making sure that no one comes in thinking they know it all. I mentioned early in my career, I always wanted to make sure I knew it all because I didn't want to be caught off guard because of the fact that I was going into that space feeling like an imposter. There are no imposters in this environment. There are journeyers. There are folks who are on a journey to learn, but there are no imposters. And so I think coming into a space knowing that you're worthy to be there and doing your best efforts to remain there and to remain moving forward, thinking and forward moving is always the goal. So just coming in with the characteristics of being a person who wants to learn, who wants to give, who wants to lead, who wants to really find their way forward and help others along the way, I believe is what makes folks successful in this field.
In student affairs, there are a lot of different departments, and some of those departments require specific training and degrees. Can you tell us about what your PhD is in, and what are some of those specialization areas that someone who is thinking about maybe working in student counseling services, um, they might want to think about as they're working on their undergraduate degree, going into a professional career in student affairs?
Absolutely. So for me, my PhD, my master's is in higher adult and lifelong education, and my PhD is in educational policy and leadership. Always knew that I wanted to be at the decision-making table. While I
Mhm.
love working with students directly, I love mentoring students, I love student programming and development, I also wanted to be able to be a voice in the room. So my degree is not specifically in student affairs, it's in educational policy and leadership and in higher education administration. I've always known I want to be an administrator. I think that's critical because there's also a degree directly in student affairs or higher education and student affairs. So part of it is knowing exactly where you want to go or what your mode is, and not everyone will know that. Again, I don't think most people know that, and that's fine because there's no undergraduate degree that prepares you for student affairs directly. There's nothing that says you're not getting an undergraduate degree in student affairs. I also believe that every degree has transferable skills that get you to this table. When you get here, for instance, you mentioned counseling. If you decide you want to be a counselor, there are certain credentials that you'd have to get, or licensures that you have to pursue in order to be a licensed counselor in this space. However, there are also ways to counsel students advising that doesn't dictate that you would need a counseling degree. And so figuring out if you want to do the clinical side of the counseling aspect or you want to do the personal side of the counseling aspect. Now, sometimes those collide because absolutely counselors do the both and when they're licensed as well. They're helping students to make lifelong decisions and decisions in the moment that affect them for a lifetime. On the other hand, many of the departments that we work with don't require a direct licensure such as counseling would, but you still allows you to really be in there mentoring students, advising students, engaging students, enabling students. And so figuring out what gets you to where. The same is true for social work. We have a lot of social workers that end up in student affairs because they're the helping professions, right? I think student affairs at its core is about enabling, engaging, and helping. Those are my three main frames as you think about this. And also, I would also add inspiring, because there are a lot of things that we do in our day-to-day work that other students pull from. I mentioned earlier the idea of having mirrors. Student affairs through and through is a whole bunch of mirrors. Wherever you look, there's someone here who's looking to see what they're going to see in you that they can find in themselves or draw it in themselves. And so figuring out whether you want to take a clinical track of how you would get your licensures or whether you want to take more other tracks that include the idea of the practice theory to practice, and then again, practice the theory, because you have to also make sure that those two are commingling as you're building frames forward too. You have
Awesome.
multiple
Thank
ways
you.
to approach it.
Thank you for that. So, for those of you who are looking to get into student affairs, remember there's uh, no one size fit all. Just come with a willingness to serve. So that's my takeaway from our conversation today. I have one last question for you, and that question is, if you could go back at any age and tell yourself anything in the world, what age would you go back to, and what would you tell yourself?
Whew. So that is a loaded question. I would say, so my identity are formed by primarily the fact that I'm a first generation college student. I'm a Black woman, and I navigated this space not really knowing the road ahead. I would say I would tell myself to lean more into what I have and recognize its strengths in my own development. I think a lot about Terry Yoso's community cultural wealth model. And I think anybody who's trying to figure out what they have to offer to the academy, even if they're first gen students or when they're first gen student, and those students who really don't have folks ahead of them who knew the way, Dr. Yoso's model is groundbreaking for how you can actually look at your own experiences. So we think about spiritual wealth, we think about aspirational wealth, we think about all those forms of wealth that really do make it so that we're where we need to be, right? Those are the forms of capital that we brought to the space. I think about the fact that for me, when I think about the navigational wealth, no one in my family had gone to college before me. So for me, it was daunting when I got there, right? I drove myself to the university. I unloaded my car. I called my family, let them know that I was there. And those are things that I had to navigate and find my way along. I
Mhm.
look back when my nieces went to college, that was not her journey. We moved her in. I think about her graduation party where someone asked her what she was going to do next. She was like, well, I'm going to college. Like, it was almost like, well, not arrogantly, but that was what she knew to be the path because she'd seen someone before her do it. And so when you think about the navigational wealth and the ways that we create consciousness of the experience for others who come behind us, that's critical. It's our job to pay it forward. I would tell myself anywhere between the ages of 18 to 25 that I absolutely, even though I was navigating those spaces on my own, that I knew what it had, because I may not have had the financial wealth that everyone else had, but I could outwork anybody. I was willing to put in the hours that it took to make sure that I could stand tall and knew what I was talking about. And no one could tell me that they were smarter than me, because we all had access to various resources and I could utilize them a little bit differently. Yes, it may have looked a little different for me than some of my peers who they came from 2 and 3 generations of college going folks. But back then, knowing that I was okay. I went directly from my undergrad, my master's, to my PhD. Now I worked full time during my master's, but I still went straight through. And so I remember graduating with my PhD, and my family was in the stands, loud and proud. My friends were there. I mean, you know what that looks like.
Yeah.
Everyone's there cheering. That next day, I like literally sobbed, because for the first time in my life, I didn't have school as my guide. I'd always been able to be smart. I'd always been able to navigate, because school was how I did that, right? That was always my torch lighting my way. I was now about to be a young professional, and no one before me and my family had professional positions in spaces like this. My family has always been hardworking. That's where I get my work ethic from. But no one had earned a college degree, and that capital looked a bit different in that space. And so while they hugged me and they loved on me and they made sure that I knew they were proud of me, nobody could tell me the next step of the journey. And so figuring out what that meant was really critical. I'm actually co-writing a book now for NASPA about first-generation college students. And so my chapter is specifically about imposter syndrome, because I recognized through and through how much I had imposter syndrome, and so how much I overworked as a way of proving that I deserve to be there. So there's no set age, but I would say what I would tell my younger self is that you are not an imposter. You're here because you've earned that seat at the table. Nobody can take that from you. The one thing that cannot be changed once you are educated, your degree can't be furloughed. Regardless of what's happening in the world, it cannot be taken away. It cannot be undone. What you've learned is yours, and is yours to impart upon someone else. And so making sure that I take that and I stand tall and I walk into a space knowing that, and again, I do now, like I'm at a point in my career now where I am grateful for every gift that God has introduced or given me. And I hope and pray that other young folks look at me and see what is possible. Despite all the things that perhaps serve as barriers, there's a difference between how a barrier is placed in your path and how you might be able to work around it. There are some structural barriers that we cannot move, but we can move ourselves. And let's figure out how we might be able to move ourselves in a direction that allows us to not eliminate the barriers, but to shine and thrive regardless of them. And so for me, I would tell my younger self that I was enough, that I could sit in any space and know what I knew, and that no one could take that from me, and that I was enough, and that what I would leave for others who are walking the journey after me is the hope, and to serve as a light and a mirror for what is possible because of what's been given to me, both internally and then what externally I've been able to achieve. So just young Black girl, you'll be okay and you'll find your way.